The Money Myth, The Great Conspiracy by T.W.S. Dutton. If there was some way that we could make complacency taxable, we might at least be on the way towards solving our economic and other problems. But not only are too many people complacent, they are completely unaware of the difference between money and real wealth, and they know even less about how money is created and by whom, and how it could and should be made our servant instead of us being its slaves. In various countries at various times it has taken many forms. When I first went to New Guinea, seashells and even salt were acceptable as currency in certain parts. In Lord Howe Island, as late as 1935, there was a dreadful plague of rats. In order to encourage the destruction of this pest, rats' tails became acceptable as currency. In fact, at various times in many parts of the world, such things as beads, feathers, carpets, leather discs, fish hooks, bronze, silver and gold have been used as currency. Today, money has degenerated to the stage where paper is used as money. In other words, money today has virtually no inherent value. Gold, silver, and even lesser metals are commodities, and do have an inherent value which can be exchanged for another commodity even in another country. Paper money has no inherent value. It is fictitious wealth. This brings us to the question, what is real wealth? Most people would say, money of course, and they would be completely wrong. Of what use to a starving man on a desert island is $1 million? Real wealth to that man would be food, shelter and clothing. Where there are no goods or services, money is worthless. This is true of every country in the world, no matter how fabulously rich it is in gold, silver or precious stones. The real wealth to the inhabitants is always the basics of food, shelter and clothing. Of course, we have come to regard luxuries such as TVs, motor cars and refrigerators, etc. also as essential, but this does not alter the basic fact that it is all these things which are produced by the knowledge, skill, initiative, planning and industry of the people. That is the real wealth of any nation. Modern technology has made it possible for us to produce far more of everything than we can use. There is more than enough food produced for everyone in Australia to be well nourished. Everyone in Australia could be comfortably dressed and live in a comfortable home. Why then are there hundreds of thousands of people in this rich country undernourished and living in slum conditions? The same applies to America, said to be the richest country in the world. Why? The answer briefly is lack of the fictitious wealth we call money, production of which in its modern form requires very little knowledge or skill and is almost costless to produce. Money, which should be merely a convenient means of transferring real wealth from one person to another, from one industry to another, or even from governments to the people. In other words, it should be our obedient servant. So let us see how we have undoubtedly allowed it to become our master, and what we must do to return it to its proper state of servitude to you and me, the people that actually create the real wealth. To most people, money and wealth is metal coins and paper notes, but in actual fact, only about 8% of business in Australia is transacted with this type of money. The other 92% by nothing as tangible as that, but merely by the entry of intangible figures in bank ledgers. The cost of producing this type of currency is about 0.5%. But I don't have to tell you how much it costs to get a loan from the banks. It is this simple fact that has given the bankers of the world the sole use of this apparently mystic power to create enormous wealth and power out of nothing, and which has made it possible for them to enslave every nation on earth. Who allowed them to usurp that power? We did. And that means every single one of us that has a vote. It is our ignorance of the facts, our apathy, our failure to demand that our elected leaders take this power away from the bankers and place it back where it belongs, where our Constitution says it should be, and that is under the control of the governments elected by the people, thus making it truly the servant of the people instead of enslaving us. Banking is the only instance in recorded history where it is possible to lend something that virtually has no material existence, make handsome profits out of it, and by this means acquire the real wealth of whole nations. Let me give you an instance of how it works. You all know the Commonwealth Bank, but how many of you know how or why it was started? It was named Commonwealth because the idea was to make the real wealth of the nation common to the people that create it, and that was the way it actually worked for all too short a period. In 1912, it opened its doors for the first time. It had no capital. Its only asset was a loan of £10,000 available by the Commonwealth government. 10 years later, it owned bank premises worth £731,000, not dollars, accumulated profits of £4,404,000. Other assets amounted to £134,356,000. By 1956, its assets had grown to over £2,000 million, a figure which at that time exceeded the value of all the assets of all the larger public companies in Australia. All this was created out of an original debt of £10,000. In addition to the above, it had provided the money to purchase the Commonwealth shipping line, build the Transcontinental Railway, and finance a large part of World War I without increasing our national debt or our interest payments. Unfortunately, that ideal state of our monetary system ended in 1923, when that great Australian, Sir Denison Miller, died. He was the first governor of the People's Bank. Within 12 months of his death, the bank was placed in charge of a board of directors. This very quickly reduced this threat to the power of the world's bankers to the status of their obedient servant. And don't believe anyone who tries to tell you that the Reserve Bank is any different. If these banks were still the servants of the people and not the obedient servants of our money masters, we would not be cursed by inflation. We would not be the victims of successive booms and busts. The nations of the world would not be staggering under a massive load of debt and incentive-destroying taxation. Talking of inflation, someone described it as a state of affluence when you never had it so good or got rid of it so fast. So, how do bankers accomplish the apparently impossible feat of creating money out of nothing, thereby accumulating real wealth and enslaving the nations of the world? Don't be embarrassed if you don't know. You would be surprised how many bank employees don't know either. And, judging by the state of this nation's finances, most of our politicians don't know, or they are accomplices in the conspiracy. Now, most people have the idea that banks only lend the money that is deposited by their clients. In actual fact, they lend anything from 10 to 15 times this amount, and this is done merely by entering figures on a card or in a ledger. This is the fictitious money that costs almost nothing to create, but for which the unfortunate borrowers have to pay interest and, in addition, have to provide real wealth as security in the form of real estate, plant, machinery, manufactured goods, and so on. And should the borrower not be able to meet the interest payments or pay off the principal, the bank forecloses and acquires the real wealth of its client for nothing. If you find this hard to believe, let me quote the words of men who were most assuredly in a position to know the facts. Sir Josiah Stamp was for many years governor of the Bank of England. After he retired, he gave a lecture to professors at the University of Texas, from which I quote, "Banking was conceived in iniquity and born in sin. The bankers own the earth. Take it away from them, but leave the power to create money, and with a flick of a pen, they will buy it back again. But if you want to continue to be slaves of bankers and pay the cost of your own slavery, then let bankers continue to create money and control credit." Graham Towers, governor of the Central Bank of Canada, when asked by a government committee how banks create money and credit, replied, "The manufacturing process consists of making a written or typed entry on a card or in a book. That is all. Broadly speaking, all new money comes out of a bank in the form of loans. As loans are debts, then under the present system, all money is debt." In reply to the question, "But if the issue of currency is the prerogative of government, then that prerogative has been transferred from the government to the bank system," Towers replied, "Yes. Sir Edward Holden, an eminent British banker, admitted under questioning, "Banking is little more than bookkeeping. It is mostly the transfer of credit from one person to another. The transfer is by check. Checks are currency. Currency is money. But I would add that they are not legal currency, and that bankers are little better than counterfeiters." The next bit of proof comes straight from the horse's mouth, none other than the Bank of New South Wales Review of October 1978, which says, "Today in Australia, as in most other modern economies, all money is a debt of the banking system." Another important source of money creation is by the banks. When a banker grants a customer credit by overdraft, the bank opens an account in its books and gives the client the right to draw funds without having first to put money into the account. But the bank deposits only increase when the customer actually draws on his account to pay his creditors. In the case of loans, funds are deposited directly to the customer's credit and result in an immediate increase in the volume of money. In either case, the money supply increases as a result of the bank's lending activities. As long as the debt remains outstanding, the community's quantity of money is increased. In other words, when money is lent by a bank, it passes into the possession of the person who borrows it. But because it is really only figures in bank ledgers, no real money has been created, but there is an increase in the community's purchasing power. For every bank loan creates a deposit, either in the bank that created it or in other banks. But the repayment of the loan destroys it, with the result that there is now less money or purchasing power to buy the goods or services produced as a result of the loan. Unless, as happens in many cases, other loans are raised, usually by hire purchase or time payment agreements made by someone wishing to purchase the goods produced. Thus is this iniquitous debt-based monetary system perpetuated. Now, the obvious question is, if it is so easy to create money and credit almost costlessly, and we produce or are capable of producing far more real wealth in goods than we can use, why is it that there is never enough money available to purchase all we want? And in many cases, what we need without going into debt. There is much more to uncover in part 2, which is coming very soon, so make sure you turn on your notifications so you don't miss it. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful and thought-provoking, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives like this. I'd also love to hear your thoughts or questions, so please drop them in the comments below. See you in part 2.